His name was Baal, but the valley beneath Jerusalem knew him by another name. Moloch is not a separate god. Moloch is the scar left on the same face. Two titles, one throne, one forbidden system. And the Bible never meant for you to separate them. This is not mythology. This is not metaphor. This is a cover-up, hiding in plain sight. Chapter 1. The Valley that remembered two names. Do not begin with the idol. Begin with the valley. Ben Hinnom lay near Jerusalem like a shadow beneath holiness. Close enough for the sacred city to smell its smoke. Low enough for guilty worshippers to pretend it was separate. The valley below carried another kind of ritual memory. A place where worship descended instead of ascending. Where fear was dressed as devotion. Where the future was offered to a false throne. Jeremiah gives the first terrible clue. He condemns the high places of Baal in the Valley of Hinnom, then ties that same cursed ground to Molech. The names appear too close for comfort. Baal seems to own the high place. Molech seems to own the horror underneath it. The hill gives the god a public face. The valley reveals what the face demands. The prophet does not simply list random idols. He draws a map of corruption. The geography itself becomes an argument. If Baal and Molech were entirely separate, why does the same wound hold both names? Why does one title stand over the altar, while the other darkens the ritual? Why does judgment fall on the whole system, not one isolated image? Because they were never two gods. They were one throne wearing two masks. The darker answer rewrites everything you thought you knew about Baal worship. Baal was the Lord worshipped in public. Moloch was the king revealed by the demand. One could be spoken under the language of blessing. The other appeared when blessing became bondage. This is how forbidden worship becomes dangerous. It does not begin with horror. It begins with need. A field needs rain. A city needs protection. A family line needs tomorrow. A frightened people look for power outside obedience. Then power begins to ask for proof. By the time the valley glows, the worshiper is already trapped. The god does not need to shout. The system speaks for him. The altar speaks for him. The priests speak for him. The fear of disaster speaks for him. And beneath every voice waits the same question. What will you give so the Lord keeps blessing you? That question is where Baal begins to change. Lordship becomes ownership. Ownership becomes rule. Rule becomes a claim over the future. And in that moment, the name Moloch becomes visible, not as a separate curiosity, but as the interface of the same forbidden throne. The valley remembers what the high place tried to hide. Baal was not only a personal name, it was a title. In Semitic usage, lord, owner, master, possessor. That makes the word more dangerous. It can sound respectable while hiding a claim. Baal was the one who owned, the lord of the place, the lord of the field, the lord of the storm, the lord who promised that life would continue. But Moloch carries another royal terror. Moloch points toward kingship, toward Melech, the enthroned ruler. And in the biblical pattern, the name is stained with shame. King becomes disgrace. Royalty becomes warning. The title is not honored, it is wounded. Now place the two titles together. Lord and king, owner and ruler, possession and command. That is not a random pairing. It is a complete tyranny. Baal claims the household. Moloch claims what the household fears to lose. And the valley shows the two titles becoming one. Chapter 2. The Bible's Encoded Wound. The Bible does not preserve forbidden names with neutral hands. It marks them, it wounds them. It makes the reader feel the shame attached to the power. Moloch arrives in biblical memory already condemned. Not as a noble king, not as a divine rival worth admiring, but as a throne remembered through revulsion. This matters because ancient names carried presence. To speak a name was not merely to describe. It was to invoke rank, memory, and authority. So when a name is reshaped by shame, the text is doing warfare. It is stripping the idol of glory. It is refusing the god his mask. It is saying, the king you feared is not majestic. He is disgrace enthroned. The Bible does not merely place Moloch near Baal. It brands the royal title with theological disgust. Then it drags Baal's high places into the same valley. The result is not a random catalog of false gods. It is a prophetic convergence. The reader is forced to descend, from Baal's height to Hinnom's depth, from lordship to kingship, from public worship to hidden cost, from promise to condemnation. Every step tightens the same question. What kind of Lord ends in that valley? What kind of blessing requires that fear? What kind of God must have his name remembered as shame? The Bible is not interested in preserving a clean museum catalog. It is interested in exposing corruption, and the corruption is unmistakable. Baal's worship stands where Moloch's shadow also appears. The high place and the valley belong to the same accusation. The ritual system is condemned, something God never commanded. The land itself becomes contaminated. The Bible's focus is not only identity, it is function. What did the God do to the worshiper? What did the system demand from the city? What did the altar teach people to fear? When Baal becomes the lord of survival, obedience begins to twist. When Moloch appears as the king of price, fear becomes sacred. And when fear becomes sacred, the conscience begins to die. That is the real abomination, not that another name was spoken, but that terror replaced trust, that the future was placed under an idol's claim, that a valley beneath Jerusalem became a counterfeit sanctuary. The Bible encoded the proof by refusing to let the names separate cleanly. Baal cannot escape the valley. Moloch cannot escape the shame. Topheth cannot escape the smoke. Hinnom cannot escape the memory. And you cannot escape the implication. One forbidden throne, hiding beneath many titles. The mask changed depending on where you stood. From the high place it looked like Baal. From the valley it looked like Moloch. Chapter 3. When the storm. God's face changes. Baal is remembered through storm imagery. Thunder, rain, the voice from the clouds. That face can look almost generous. A storm, God does not first appear as a devourer. He appears as the one who can keep the land alive. But that is exactly why the mask works. The power that gives rain can claim what rain produces. The Lord of fertility can become the owner of increase. The God who promises tomorrow can demand tomorrow back. That is the terrible reversal. The sky god descends into the valley. The rain becomes smoke. The blessing becomes payment. The Lord becomes king, and the king is no longer beautiful. This is how Baal's face changes in the biblical imagination, not because thunder vanishes, but because the cost is revealed. The public cult speaks of life. The hidden logic speaks of possession. The worshiper thinks he is buying safety. The prophet sees enslavement. The city thinks it is securing the future. The text says the future is being surrendered. Baal is the voice that promises. Moloch is the silence after the price. Baal is the mask facing the crowd. Moloch is the face beneath the mask. And once that face appears, the storm no longer sounds like rain. It sounds like a furnace breathing below the hills. The valley has answered the sky, and the god has been exposed. But the story does not end there. In the next forbidden archive, we descend further, to the altar that remembered both names, to the fire that consumed more than children, to the moment Jeremiah stood at the edge of Hinnom and spoke the word that changed everything. Topheth. Chapter 4. The mask burns, the king remains. Now picture the valley. Jerusalem stands above it, carrying the memory of the living God. Below, the forbidden high places lie dark against the slopes. The stones do not speak, but the pattern speaks for them. The people may have said Baal. The prophet heard Moloch. The worshippers may have called him Lord. The text marked him as king. The cult may have promised survival. God called it abomination. And the valley became a witness no generation could erase. This is the final horror. Not that one ancient god had many names, but that evil does not require one stable face. It only requires a title people are willing to obey. Lord, king, owner, master, provider, protector. Every title can become a mask when the demand beneath it is hidden. Baal was the mask that could be honored. Moloch was the demand that could not be purified. The storm God's face burns away. The fertility promise turns to ash. The Lord of the high place descends into Hinnom, and under the smoke he is revealed as the king of shame. This is why Moloch's name feels cursed. It is not remembered with glory. It is remembered as a warning. and Baal stands too close to escape that flame. If Baal and Moloch were one forbidden system, every high place contains a valley. Every promise of abundance contains a question of price. Every false lord eventually reveals what kind of king he serves. The Bible encoded the proof, so the mask could never fully return. Yet masks always return. Under cleaner names, they return as safety. They return as prosperity. They return as the voice that calls surrender wisdom. The old valley still answers. It says, "Look beneath the title," because the name spoken above may be Baal, but the name waiting below may still be Moloch. If this story opened the valley, do not leave it silent. Were Baal and Moloch two powers standing too close together, or one forbidden throne wearing two titles? Write your answer before the smoke settles. I read everyone. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and descend with us into the next forbidden archive. Continue with Gods of Ruin, global dark deities and mythic tyrants on this channel, because some gods were not forgotten. They were buried under safer names.